Hey guys, welcome back to the Earn Your Badge from Home program. Today, y'all are gonna earn your Coding for Good badge number 2 by making a maze game. So before y'all get started and getting settled in, make sure you run over and grab a piece of paper and a pencil, something to write with, because you're gonna be needing it a little later on in the video to plan out your maze game. So make sure you get yourself just set up with that real quick and then start the video, all right?
All right, so now let's take a look at what the project you guys are going to be building today is. So in case you aren't familiar with what a maze is, it's basically where there's a path that our character here, it's going to be Sprite Cat, is trying to follow in order to get from the place that they entered to an exit spot. So this is our exit spot. They're trying to get through this maze and figure out which pathway to take in order to be able to leave the maze. So with this, in order to start the game, I'm going to hit the green flag to run some code that we have going in the background. And I'm going to be hitting my arrow keys to get Sprite Cat to move. So moving right, sorry, that's left, left, right, up, and down. Now notice, Sprite Cat can't go through these purple lines. These are essentially like the walls of the maze. You may or may not have visited something like a corn maze before, and you're trying to get to the center, right? You can't go through those walls, and neither can Sprite Cat through these walls. So when I hit the up arrow, I'm continuously hitting the up arrow. Notice how Sprite Cat bounces right back off. So that's the code that I mentioned that's running in the background. We're gonna make sure that Sprite Cat can't go through these walls, so it's just like a regular maze. So I'm gonna move Sprite Cat all the way through the maze. And this is a maze that I drew. You guys are gonna draw your own. And you can totally pick a different path. You can make it harder, easier, that's up to you. And then we're just gonna get to that red spot. So that's pretty much it. Another portion of this game is every time I hit the green flag, Sprite Cat starts at the green spot. So we're gonna add some code telling Sprite Cat that it always has to start at this green spot. All right. Now, before I hit the create button to actually start building our project, something that's really important about being a good programmer with good practices is planning out your maze. So some things you probably want to keep in mind. This is the point where I'm going to ask y'all to grab a piece of paper and a pencil in case you already don't have one. Pause the video, go grab one and come right back. And we're going to be writing down what steps we as the programmer are going to build our project in. So some things you might want to keep in mind are what directions will Sprite Cat move around the screen? You want to think. I don't want to give away too much, but maybe up, down, and so on. What buttons are the player going to click on the board, right? What on the keyboard? Am I hitting letters on the keyboard? Am I hitting arrow keys on the keyboard? What am I hitting, right? What do you want your maze to look like? Maybe you want to take a second to draw it out on your piece of paper so that when you're drawing it in Scratch, you have something to go off of. Because drawing on a piece of paper and drawing on the computer can feel very, very different. So take a few minutes to plan out how your game is going to look like. Maybe a couple pieces of the code. Maybe you already have some blocks in mind that you might want to be using. Things like move 10 steps, maybe. Keep all of that in mind as you're planning it out. Get your piece of paper ready. And once you think you have a pretty decent plan, head back over to this video. Maybe you want to take a pause to plan your maze out and then come right back. And then we'll actually start building. All right, so now let's actually put our plan into action, right? So as always, I'm going to hit create to open up a blank new project. And since this is a maze game, let's start with actually drawing out our maze on the computer, right? So you may or may not have already drawn a background before, but that's what we're going to be doing today. So in order to actually draw a new backdrop or even just change this white backdrop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my cursor over to this white rectangle that's on the far right. And I'm going to click on stage. Okay, so when you click on stage, notice how the blocks on the side kind of changed a little bit. At this point, you are in a workspace where you can mess with your backdrops all you want. You can add blocks to have them have a couple cool effects. Obviously, they can't do as much as our sprites do, like move around, which is why there are no motion blocks. But your stage is where you work with your backdrops and you do all the fun stuff with them. So I'm going to click on this tab here that says backdrops. And this is where I have a chance to actually do some fun stuff with it. So I'm going to pick purple as my color since it's already there. But if you want, you can move these knobs to have any color you want. So I'm going to keep it a purple because I like purple. And then I'm also, guys, this is super important. I'll explain why later on. But you want to make sure that there is no outline. So basically what that means is I'm going to click on this rectangle tool. When I click on it, it highlights in blue so I know I've selected it. And then I'm going to click down on the screen. And as I'm still holding down, I'm going to drag my mouse so I can draw shapes. So I'm still holding down, but as I move around the screen, I'm able to draw a rectangle, right? And notice how there's this black outline surrounding my rectangle. We don't want that because later on in our code, when we're trying to get SpriteCat to actually bounce off of this wall, we want all of our maze to be the one color. So once you have picked a color to fill your shape with, you have to stick with that for the rest of your maze because the color is how SpriteCat is going to detect, is going to figure out that there's a wall here. And if there's different colors on it, our code won't work the same. So we always want it to be the same color throughout. So that's why I don't want this black outline on it either. So I'm going to go over to this black square over here. I'm going to click right on it. And I'm going to select this white box with a red line in the bottom left corner. So when I select it, now it says that there should be no outline on the shapes I draw. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a new rectangle. And notice how this one does not have any sort of outline. So these are obviously not how I want my maze to look. So I'm going to delete them. The way I can delete them is I can select this mouse tool again, click on them, and then I'm going to hit the delete button. And then same thing over here, hit the delete button. So I'm going to go back to my square tool now. Once again, make sure that there's no outline. And I'm going to stick with this purple color for the whole time. So I've selected this fill once, and I'm not changing it again. So take a few moments to draw what you want your maze to look like. I'm going to keep mine relatively pretty simple. And also you want your lines to be not super thick in the sense of you want to create paths in your maze that SpriteCat can move through, actually has room to move through. And I'm sure you noticed SpriteCat was pretty small in the example. That's what we are going to do eventually. But to be able to see SpriteCat, you want to have him at least be big enough for us to be able to see. So make sure that your pads are sort of big. Just don't make them super tiny. I guess that's a better way of saying it. And also something that's nice with this rectangle tool, notice how these like blue circles pop up, and as I hover over them, these arrows kind of pop up. This is so I can adjust the shape once I have drawn it. So if I hover my cursor over the middle part and see how it creates this like straight up and down arrow rather than one that's kind of crooked, I'm going to go right in the middle. I'm going to click and I can adjust it a little. By all means, if you're not comfortable doing that, that's okay. So I'm going to keep drawing my lines. I try to get them right pretty much the first time, just so I don't have to do too much. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Click out of it so that the blue disappears. Okay, so now I have like a little bit of an entry point. And I'm going to adjust that. Okay. I'm not the best artist, as you can tell. And the way you can get the blue to disappear is you just click once outside of it. That's all you gotta do. All right, so that maze looks pretty good to me. If you need a little extra time, feel free to pause the video. I'm going to add one last bit of color, and I'm going to add that green circle to show this is where Sprite Cat's going to start, and the red circle to show that this is where Sprite Cat's going to exit, the way I'm going to do that. So I'm going to click on this circle right here and change the color to be green. Once again, make sure that this circle also doesn't have an outline. So continuing to make sure that this has a red line through it, this box right here. I'm going to create my circle. So I clicked on the circle tool, and this is going to allow me to create circles basically the same ways that we created these thicker rectangle lines. So when I click, and as I continue to hold down, I move my mouse, I'm able to create a circle, which is super cool. And then we can move the shape around. And you know you can move it around when it's highlighted or outlined in this blue here. And this outline just means that we have control over the shape. It doesn't actually affect what the actual color of our shape is, and then I'm gonna grab red and do the same thing over here. Once again, making sure that this has no outline. All right, so our background is all set. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to Sprite Cat to actually start getting it coding, right? So to make sure I'm adding code for Sprite Cat, I'm clicking on the Sprite Cat image down here, click, and now I know that Sprite Cat's outlined in blue, meaning I'm adding code to Sprite Cat, and all our motion blocks are back because now we're working with a sprite instead of a backdrop. So for starters, you may have done this before, especially if you've completed your Coding for Good Badge 1 with me. Well, we're gonna get Sprite Cat to move with our arrow keys. And the way we do that is we're gonna go into events, and I'm gonna grab this when space key pressed, because instead of a space key, I'm gonna select one of the 4 arrow keys. So I'm gonna select up arrow first. And this is essentially a way for the computer to know that Sprite Cat, we're gonna add some code, but Sprite Cat needs to move up when we hit the up arrow key. So when the situation happens, the situation of us hitting the up arrow key, the computer knows I've been told to check for when up arrow key is being pressed. Now I'm going to run whatever code they're about to place underneath here. Okay? So before I add any code there though, I'm just gonna grab all 4 events because they'll just be right here. So I'm gonna have an event for every single arrow. Okay, so now I have room to attach blocks underneath for every single direction. And with moving with arrow keys, we want to make sure that Sprite Cat is being told to know what direction he's traveling in and then take steps in that direction. Once again, thinking about breaking down things that may already seem simple to us into even more simple steps. It's going to be something you're constantly going to be hearing from me because that is the root of coding. That's always how we're going to think as a programmer. How can we make a process simpler? Okay, so especially because these blocks here are pretty limited when you think about it, but as you combine them, as you have more and more blocks put together in your workspace, they can do some really cool things. But in order to do those really cool things, it starts with very limiting simple blocks. All right, so I'm gonna grab this point and direction block because I want Sprite Cat to know what direction he's traveling in. And then I'm gonna click inside this white circle and move this arrow key that's inside to be facing up, because now Sprite Cat knows I'm gonna be traveling in this direction, right? Pointing in this up direction. And now he knows how to go there, but he doesn't know how many steps to take, which is why I'm gonna grab that move 10 steps block. And now Sprite Cat knows. So I'm gonna test this out using my up arrow key. And I'm hitting my up arrow and Sprite Cat's moving up, which is exactly what I wanted. So now I'm gonna try doing it, and I encourage you to try pausing the video and doing this on your own as well, figuring out how Sprite Cat to move in the down, right, and left directions as well. Let's grab a point direction, move this arrow to be facing down, and then tell it to move 10 steps in that direction. And then this one, I click inside the white circle. It's already facing to the right, which is awesome. Move 10 steps. And then one more for my left. And then you always want to make sure that your blocks are attached. You know they're attached when you're attaching them in the first place. A little gray shadow appears. If that shadow doesn't appear, they're not going to move together. But as soon as that gray shadow appears, they'll move to fit together. If these two pieces aren't touching, if they're not moving like this, if they aren't attached like this, then this code won't run. They all have to be put together. Okay, so I'm gonna test out all 4 of my directions. Make sure that Sprite Cat is moving in the direction that you have it with the arrow key. What I mean by that is if this is down, I want to double check that this arrow inside of the point direction is also down. I want to make sure that it's not left or right, because then Sprite Cat's not going to go down when you hit the down arrow key, right? So test that out. And it looks like everything is working pretty well. Now, something that's super important is we're going to be constantly repeating this process of checking our code after we've written sections of it. So every time I finish a direction, you might want to test out that yours works as well, right? And making sure that our code works as we build it and testing it out to make sure it works is also something that's really important as a programmer, because say something is off. What if this arrow was facing this way, right? And my down arrow key is messed up. I want to fix that as soon as I possibly can. And I might not realize that this is a mistake if I don't test out my down arrow key and see if Sprite Cat's moving in the right direction. See, right now I'm hitting the down arrow key, but it's moving to the left or to the right. So I'm trying to make sure that Sprite Cat goes perfectly down. So it looks like all 4 of our directions are looking good. The one last thing I want to add is I want to make sure that Sprite Cat can't move off of the edge of the screen. So when I move them to the left, see how Sprite Cat can go off? I don't want that. I always want to be able to make sure I can see Sprite Cat. So the way we're going to do that is I'm going to grab the if on edge bounce block. This is going to tell Sprite Cat that he needs to constantly check what edge he's on, regardless of what direction he's moving in. So it doesn't matter if I'm hitting my left arrow, my right arrow, my up or down, no matter which way Sprite Cat is moving, he should know that he should bounce off of these edges. So I'm going to grab if on edge bounce and place it under each of these sections of code, these scripts, if you remember. Cool. So now I'm going to test it out, make sure that Sprite Cat actually does bounce off the edge. And it looks like it works. Might as well test it out for all the scripts. Cool. Awesome. Okay. So now let's think about getting Sprite Cat to, first of all, be able to move through this maze, and then we'll think about how we can get him to bounce off of these purple walls. So for starters, he's way too big right now, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my one green flag clicked block. This is going to be, again, just as soon as we start the game, we want to make sure that Sprite Cat is A, small enough to fit through this whole maze without touching any of the walls if he's trying to move just through the center. And B, he always has to start at this green spot. So first off, let's just make him small enough. Now, you can adjust the size by clicking inside of this white bubble. But another way we can adjust the size is I'm going to head over to looks, and I'm going to grab this set size to 100 block, not the change size by block. That is very, very different. Make sure you grab the set size to block, okay? And notice how this number right now is the same as the number in this white oval. So I'm going to set my cat's size to be probably 25. I'm going to type in 25. I clicked inside the white circle, and then I typed in 25. Now I'm going to hit enter. Then when I hit the green flag to test out how big Sprite Cat ended up being, now he gets much smaller because 25 is much smaller than 100. And notice how this number automatically changed as well. Just another way to change Sprite Cat size. I also want to make sure that Sprite Cat is small enough to fit through this game and basically move through the entire thing without touching any of the walls, just by being in the center. You don't want Sprite Cat to be kind of like an in-between size where he's kind of touching the wall. See how he can kind of touch the wall? It can't quite fit. It's not very snug. You want to make sure that he can go through without touching anything, because when we add code telling him to bounce off the walls, it can cause a little bit of problem. So always make sure that he's small enough to fit through the entire maze without touching anything as is. When he does touch, there'll be code preventing him, but you don't want him to always be touching, basically be stuffed in there, right? He wants to have enough room to move. So next thing is every time I start my game, every time I hit the green flag, I want Sprite Cat to be in this spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab Sprite Cat, I'm going to click on him and then drag so I can move this sprite all around the screen. I'm going to place him on the green spot. Okay? And the reason I'm doing this is because notice how the numbers in these X and Y bubbles change. So I'm moving Sprite Cat here, these numbers changed again. Basically, these numbers, what they mean is they are the computer's way of knowing our sprite's location on the screen. Okay, so the computer interprets, it understands location with numbers. Okay, so every single position on the screen, whether Sprite Cat's here, whether Sprite Cat's over here or over here, the computer has a way of understanding its location using these two numbers. So we can take advantage of that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place Sprite Cat over my green circles first, and then I'm going to go into motion, and I'm going to grab this go to XY block. So notice how this XY is the same as the bubbles inside of, or the bubbles over here, these XY bubbles over here. Okay, so basically that's going to say, make sure every time I hit the green flag, because that's what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag it and place it right underneath. Every time I hit the green flag, make sure that Sprite Cat is in this location. Okay, and I know that these numbers mean this location because I was the one who moved Sprite Cat to be on that green spot. And notice how Sprite Cat's not on the green spot right now, so these numbers don't match because the computer is reading, this is Sprite Cat's new location, and it's translating that, it's changing that to be in a number form. Okay, so instead of saying a spot on the screen, it's saying Sprite Cat's XY are 90 and minus 39. Okay, I want Sprite Cat to be on the green spot, so I'm going to click here, and notice how the bubbles over here automatically change to be the same numbers. Okay, so when I hit the green flag, Sprite Cat starts there, and I can move Sprite Cat over here and then hit the green flag again, and Sprite Cat always knows to start at that spot. Cool, so now Sprite Cat's small enough to fit through the maze and starts where he's supposed to, but he can still go through walls, which we don't want. So what I'm gonna do is, well, let's think. What's special about this maze, right? Well, the way that Sprite Cat knows it's touching the wall of the maze rather than touching a green spot or touching the white background is, well, it's going to be touching something that's purple, right? And that's why I said it was super, super important to make sure that your whole maze is one color, because this is how we're going to check if Sprite Cat is touching the wall. We're going to say, okay, I know if Sprite Cat's touching the color purple, he should not be able to move through it. He should essentially have to bounce off of any time he touches purple, right? And that's another reason you want Sprite Cat to be small enough to fit through these pathways without being squished between these two walls. You want him to have room to be able to move without touching. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go over to sensing, and we're gonna look. Well, there's a sensing block that says, check if I'm touching a color. That's probably something we want, right? So I'm gonna drag it into my workspace. Whoopsies. I'm gonna drag it into my workspace. I don't have anything to place this inside of right now, but that's okay. We're gonna build something like that in just a second. But first, the way I can get it to check if SpriteCat is touching this exact purple color is I'm gonna click inside of this circle and I'm gonna click on this dropper tool. So when I click on it, the circle appears on my screen, see? And I'm gonna line up this square I have in the center of my circle to be purple. And you'll know that, don't worry about the black square that's glitching on the side, behind it, don't worry about that. But when the outline of my circle is purple, I know I can click. But right now, see how it's outlined in white? I want it to outline in purple. And then I click, and now it fills this oval with the exact purple color that is my maze. You want to make sure you're not just changing it to be approximately the same color. You want it to be the exact color, otherwise SpriteCat won't recognize it. The computer's super, super picky. So you want to grab this dropper tool and get the exact color of your maze. Okay, make sure you go right from like the center. Okay, so now we have it checking, well, we have it being able to sense if it's touching purple, but it's really not checking if it is, right? So you may be familiar with this awesome if statement, right? And then what we can do is we can place our sensing block inside of the if statement, and this has SpriteCat check if he's touching the purple color. And then we're gonna give him something to do in case he is touching it. That's what's gonna go inside of this empty space here. So I'm gonna attach this to my script. I'm gonna say, okay, how are we going to tell SpriteCat that he can't move through these through these purple walls? Well, we're gonna do a fun little exercise real quick. So what I want you to do is take a break from the computer real quick. Don't pause the video, but I just want you to get up out of your chair and stand in a space where you have basically enough room to take a couple steps forward and backwards. That's all I need you to do, okay? So keep the video running so you can hear me, but I just want you out of your chair and have a little bit of room to take a couple steps. Now, what you're gonna do is it's gonna be a little bit like Simon Says, but basically you just have to follow whatever instruction I'm about to tell you, okay? So I want you to take one step forward. Now take one step back. Make sure your steps aren't too big. Then take one step forward. Now one step back. One step forward. One step back. One step forward. Back. One step forward. One step 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 back. So at this point, you might be a little, right? You feel almost maybe a little stuck in the same position, like you aren't really going forward or back because I keep giving you directions that are opposite. And as it starts to feel like I'm giving you those directions almost pretty much at the same time, it feels like you're getting a little confused, right? Because you can't be in both places at the same time. You can't be one step forward and one step back. You can sit right back down in your chair now. We're done with the exercise. But this is basically what we're going to tell SpriteCat. We're going to try to confuse SpriteCat a little bit when he touches the purple color. Because right now, if I'm trying to move through the wall, I'm going to be hitting my right arrow key and essentially my left or my right or whatever arrow key. I'm telling him to take 10 steps towards the wall. And so what we're going to say is, hold up, when you touch the purple wall, you're going to take 10 steps backwards, away from the wall. So it's going to have two arguments that are kind of butting heads. They don't agree because they're opposite, right? It's going to be given one direction when someone's hitting the arrow key. It's saying, okay, I'm trying to move forward, but I've also been given the instruction of when I touch the purple, I also need to take one step backwards. So when there's two opposites happening at the same time, it's not going to be able to go through the wall because it's going to get confused. It's going to bounce right off because just like you might have felt a little stuck, it's not really going to go too far in either direction. So the way we can tell to go minus 10 steps, go 10 steps backward, is I'm going to go back into motion. I'm going to grab my move 10 steps block and place it inside of my if statement. and I'm going to click inside. I'm going to hit the minus symbol. The minus is right next to the 0 on your keyboard. And I'm going to say minus 10. Because now it's being given two opposite directions. Another way to think about it is if it's being given the instruction to move 10 steps, and then it's being given the instruction to move minus 10 steps, what's 10 minus 10? 0, right? So it's essentially, if it's being given those two instructions at the same time, it's going to go 0 steps in any direction. Okay? So that's how we're going to get it to bounce off. So let's try it again. Let me hit the green flag. I'm going to do this. Well, look at that. Sprite Cat can still move through walls. Well, you didn't do anything wrong, but your code, our code, is still a little incomplete. Because here's the thing. Computers, they're pretty lazy, right? So when they read this if statement, it'll read it once. For example, right now, where Sprite Cat is standing, where if I hit the green flag and Sprite Cat's in this spot in the green circle, he's already checked once to check if he's touching the purple wall. And he said, am I touching purple? No. Okay, I'm not moving negative 10 steps. And I'm also never going to check again. So we want the computer constantly essentially wondering if Sprite Cat is touching purple. He's going to say, am I touching purple? Am I touching purple? Am I touching purple? Oh, I am. Okay, as soon as I do touch purple, let me run this instruction. But if I'm not, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to skip over it, and I'm going to continue checking. And only when I actually do touch purple am I going to read this block inside. Otherwise, I'm going to skip over it. So what we're going to do to get it to constantly be checking is we're going to wrap this if statement inside of a forever loop. Now, it's super important that you don't have these two inside of the forever loop because we only want Sprite Cat in this location one time. We don't want him constantly forever there. We only want him constantly checking if he's touching purple. So let me hit the green flag now. Notice how the script continues to say highlighted in yellow. If it's completely outlined in yellow, that means the script is running, the section of code is running. And now let me hit, okay, I'm going left, right, and I hit up, and now Sprite Cat bounces off the wall, and he can't go through. So I'm going to move Sprite Cat all the way over. And once again, can't go through any of our walls, can't cheat. I'm going to go through. And it looks like Sprite Cat has touched the red circle. And at this point, your maze game, congratulations, is all complete. So always make sure we give it a name and save. If there isn't a Save Now button appearing in this top corner, that means your project has automatically saved, so you don't need to worry. I'm just going to call it Maze Game. I just clicked inside of this bar right here and gave a name. And then you can hit See Project Page. I'm going to share my project. And now you can show other people this. If you want to show a parent, a sibling, maybe send the link to a friend, share it with your friends. But congratulations, your maze game's all complete.